Hi friends, I was thinking in my devos this morning about qualities of a godly guy, or things that I would want to aspire to, or I'd want my son or anyone I was mentoring to aspire to. And so here are seven couplets, seven pairs of character traits that I would want to cultivate in myself and those around me. Okay, let's begin. The first one is knowing how to control one's emotions as well as express one's emotions. I think one way of saying this would be knowing how to cry and not cry. I think in terms of controlling one's emotions, I think of Jesus' example where he was when he was about to be slaughtered, he was about to be crucified, and he kept silent. I think that took a lot of emotional control. Or even as he was on the cross, when perhaps he would be tempted to be bitter or wrathful or resentful, he chose grace, and he chose to pray, God, forgive them. And he chose to think more about caring for his mother rather than about how to get back at his enemies. And so I think that's a great example of controlling one's emotions. In terms of expressing one's emotions, I think we have Jesus wept. We have Paul wept. We have these different examples of even David weeping as he kind of crawls around trying to escape Saul in 1 Samuel, or was it 2 Samuel? Regardless, I think it's just the idea that God gave us emotions as a gift, but it's not meant to be a gift that rules us. Rather, it's a gift that we're called to manage and to utilize, and for us to control our emotions rather than them controlling us. And so we should be able to, as men of God, cry out at the injustices of the world, as well as to know when to wait to cry out, to not just immediately shout at whatever injustice we see or protest, but to prayerfully contemplate with God when to act and when not to act. I think a lot of guys often wrestle with one or the other, whereas one, they just never speak out, or two, they just always speak out. And I think the question is to be thoughtful about when. The second couplet is talking about suffering well and resting well. I think it's hard to divorce Jesus' life from suffering. He says, if you are my disciples... I wish I did a little bit more research. I think it was roughly like, if you are my disciples, you will suffer. Or do not be surprised when you face suffering in the world. And regardless, if you just look at Jesus' life, he didn't have a place to lay his head. He walked around. Many people loved him. Many people hated him. And he just walked that path. And I think he calls us to also pick up our crosses, which is a symbol of intense suffering, and to follow him. And so I think the character trait is being able to joyfully press on amidst pain and affliction and opposition. On the flip side, which I think is perhaps it could be viewed as opposites, but I don't think these could exist well without each other. And that is resting well. Whereas suffering well could perhaps be viewed as proactive in the midst of things coming against you, I think resting well is just about stopping and just letting that river of life just take you as it will, and to just give thanks and to stop striving and to be still and to know that he is our God and that he is God and that his name will be glorified whether or not we serve him or not. Third couplet is being comfortable with silence and seeking counsel. I think we often will say things like overthinking, as though thinking deeply about things is a bad thing. I think there is an issue where we think in circles, where even though we think more, we're not actually making any progress towards a solution or a conclusion. But I think being able to think deeply, to remember, to be able to analyze, or just observe what is going on within us, as well as perhaps trying to identify whether that which is within us is from God, is from the devil, is from our flesh, is from his spirit, and to seeing whether it's good or not. I think there's one line from Mother Teresa's life where she says, I don't view myself as anything special. I am just a contemplative in this world. And I think that what that means is that she just loved God, loved her neighbor, and then contemplated, hey, what am I to do in the world with my opportunity and gifts and position in life? And she figured, let's serve the poorest of the poor in Kakula. Pretty sure I messed the pronunciation of that up. But I think that's what we're called to do too. To love God, to love his people, and to sit in silence and to contemplate. Given my position, my opportunities, my gifts, my connections, how does God desire for me to serve? And then to serve. On the opposite side of seeking counsel and being introspective is to seek counsel. So to be comfortable with silence and seeking counsel. I think I may have messed that up. Comfortable with silence, seeking counsel. The idea is to acknowledge that no matter how good you are at reading the Bible and praying and talking to God and looking deep within yourself, others know more than we do. Together, we are not as dumb as one of us. And together, we have much more knowledge and experience and understanding than any single one of us. I think Proverbs talks about this a lot, where Solomon says something to the likes of, he who has many counselors will not something. I'll have to look that up again. Thank you for your patience. Or maybe you do, and let us know in the comments below. But it's the idea of both being able to not seek counsel and be able to process one's thoughts and emotions with God and his spirit, as well as desiring counsel and yet not needing it. I think that's the tension between this third one. Fourth one, it's about a man of God being able to stand alone while not standing alone, or can stand alone but doesn't stand alone. And so the first one is talking about being confident enough in one's convictions, being courageous enough to go against the tide. I think that today, in a very polarized world, we often are forced to align ourselves with one stance or another. That either you're against the COVID vaccines or you're for the COVID vaccines. Either you are... What was the other one? There was COVID. There was another... Either you're for Trump or you're against Trump. That's perhaps less polarizing than the vaccines was. But in my own experience, as well as in this one research paper about genocide, they talk about how the thing that breaks down polarization is not great arguments. It's about a third perspective. It's about nuance. It's about saying, hey, vaccines are great, and the right to choose and not to lose one's rights if they choose not to is great. But how can we hold these both in tension? How can we perhaps respect the right to consent in medical procedures, as well as recognize that vaccines could save lives, as well as perhaps a lot of lives? It's about being willing to be rejected and ostracized for one's beliefs. I think Jeremiah 1, was it Jeremiah? I think it was Jeremiah 1. I think in Jeremiah 1, we see the same thing, where God tells him, like, hey, be bold, be strong. I think he said something even to the likes of be a bronze wall. And the idea there has been Jeremiah, if you go to the end, I think he preached like the same message for like 30 to 40 years. Okay? I've tried preaching the same message for about 3 to 4 years while I was in university. And it is so discouraging. It is so easy to just give up on something like that. But 40 years. It's crazy. Jeremiah preached that, hey, if you guys don't turn back to God, you're going to be taken over. I think the Babylonians or the Assyrians are going to come and they're going to take over Jerusalem, and we're going to be exiled. And Jeremiah preached that again and again and again and again. 40 years, people were probably sick and tired of him. And then it happened, and then people were saying, the people who did not go into exile, they went to Jeremiah and said, hey man, we really messed up. What should we do now? And Jeremiah told them, stay where you're at, plant farms, and just rebuild lives and just be faithful to God now. And even after Jeremiah's 40-year-old prophecy came true, people still went against him. And so, yeah, I think part about being a man of God is being willing to stand on your beliefs and being willing to get to a point where you're so confident that this is what the right thing is to do, whether it's through seeking counsel and being silent, that you're able to stand against the world, being confident that God's on your side. At the same time, not standing alone. And so I think one of the big and the hard things about being in a Western world is that individualism is all around us, that we would rather have the convenience of doing what we want to do in the moment rather than being put into the mess of the village and family life that a communal life entails. And so I think ideally for a man of God, they should have 3 intimate friends that live nearby. There should be 12 close friends that you're just journeying life with. And then there should be about 72 community members. People who perhaps don't share similar interests, but you're just journeying alongside in life together, often like in a similar physical location. And so, for example, that could be a church family. That could be a community, not based on faith, but you regularly gather. And the idea is that God didn't create for us to be alone. And there's so much richness in finding friends where you just have a natural connection and you can just journey through life together in love and hopes and in your ups and in your downs, that you can break each other's and hurt each other and forgive one another and continue growing. Yeah. I think a man of God can stand alone with God behind him or before him, but he doesn't stand alone because he calls us to engage in the body of Christ and in community. Okay, number 5. A man of God gives generously as well as grows resources or multiplies resources. And so I think there's part of this idea of being unattached from money and not serving money, not making that your master or mammon your master. And then there's the idea of and being shrewd and willing to invest one's resources into building up what really matters, such as the kingdom of God or relationships. So being able to give generously, but also being able to grow resources, to be able to grow money, to be able to multiply money. And this is really based in the parable of the talents. Right? In the parable of the talents, the master gives his servants money with the expectation that they would multiply it. And so the question is not and so I think the question there is not how do we make as much profit, and even if it means we hurt a lot of people in the process. I think the question is how can we make profit in a way that blesses everyone around us. I think that's what it means to be faithful with material resources. To multiply them, that we might give even more. And that we might create a society where there's a lot of value and service to one another. Okay. 6th. I should probably say at this point that I often wrestle with one of these. One of these I'm typically quite strong in. The other I'm more weaker in. Let's start. So these two are caring for himself in terms of like personal hygiene and chores and cooking, eating, laundry, and then caring for others. So I'm good at caring for others, still learning how to care for myself. But let's talk about caring for himself at one moment. I think I was thinking about the biblical basis, and some people would say, the body is the temple of God, and that's why you should care for yourself. But I think it's more so of being faithful with a little versus being faithful with much. I think at the end of the day, I am an image bearer of God, and so I need to take care of myself because I reflect Christ. If I don't take care of myself, Christ may be misrepresented. And then the other idea is that if I'm trying to care for more than one person, more than just myself, and I can't take care of myself, then it'd be unlikely that God would bless me with more. If I'm unfaithful with a little, I'll probably be unfaithful with much. So if I can't take care of one person, I probably won't be able to take care of many people, or even 2 people. The other part about himself that I wanted to kind of sneak in here was marriage. And so in Ephesians 5, Paul talks about how the husband is called to take care of the wife as his own body. And so therefore the idea that when you take care of your wife, when you take care of your marriage, you're actually caring for yourself. And I think one of the biggest reframes or the paradigm shifts that my girlfriend's father helped me with taught me was the idea that when God calls a husband to give up his life for his wife, that includes one's ministry. So I could see myself as someone where it's like, hey, I want to find a woman who cares just as much about the poor as I do, and who is willing to kind of like tolerate me not giving her much time and attention while still expecting her to support me in the ministry, in the name of serving the poor, in the name of glorifying God. But I realized that this paradigm shift is counter to the example of Christ, right? If Christ lived longer on the earth, he probably could have cared for the poor a lot better than I could have. And yet he died, and he chose to end his life short so that his wife, his bride, the church, could grow and flourish. And then even thinking from a systemic level, I realized that a lot of the poor exists due to weak families or due to unhealthy families. I like to tell people that, hey, if every family was strong, we probably wouldn't have any of the social issues that I want to invest my life, or I feel called to invest my life in resolving or trying to address. If we just had strong families. And so it would be ironic, for example, that if I was trying to help people with addiction and I had kids, and because I neglected them, that they developed addictions. And yeah, so I think a godly man takes care of himself, and that both includes him and his marriage, as well as his family. And then he also takes care of others. He uses his strengths to help others. This comes from the verse, the strong should help the weak. He also provides for the marginalized. I think if you read the Bible, there's a big heart to care for the orphans and the widows and the foreigners. Matthew 25 talks about feeding the hungry, giving water to the thirsty, clothing the naked, welcoming the stranger, visiting the prisoner, and caring for the sick. To care for others. Okay, last one, number 7, and then there's a bonus one after this. It's about being able to write clearly and respect uncertainty. So I was actually going to stop, but then I prayed about it. I was like, God, do you want me to stop now? He's like, no, keep going. And so he talked about, and so the idea about writing clearly, it was kind of inspired by Paul's statement where his letters, he said that people would read his letters and they'd be like, wow, this guy is so cool. And then they would meet Paul in person and they'd be like, wow, this guy is so timid. I think the idea is that when you have as much time as you want to think and write, you should be able to create a clear, thoughtful narrative about how you see the world, the problems you think are important, and perhaps the solutions you propose. I think that mindset, or that mind, would have been cultivated through through being praying and studying God's word, but also by listening a lot before speaking. And so the idea about being able to write well is not so much the end goal, but rather I think it's very hard to write well without having a well-ordered mind behind it. It's hard to write clearly without being able to think clearly. I think that's important for a godly man. And perhaps it comes from the biblical basis of being single-minded. I think James talks about this. I think Ephesians talks about this. Talks about how if we want two things, whether it's God and money, whether it's God and fame, whether it's God and a wonderful family, if we have two things constantly competing between us, we're not going to be able to think clearly, and we're not going to be able to write clearly. But when we're single-minded, I think it's a lot easier to be able to be articulate and clear in the things that we say. On the other side of writing clearly is respecting uncertainty. I think, again, we have these two opposites where it's like, hey, I don't know, I'm not confident in my beliefs, and so I'm not going to present them with confidence. And then the other side is like, hey, I'm absolutely right. If you don't agree with me, then you are either dumb or immoral or illogical or can't think clearly. It's about having a humility that comes from recognizing the uncertainty that's inherent with life. Paul talks about a few mysteries. He talks about marriage being a mystery. He talks about, I think, even different aspects of Christ's identity that's a mystery. Don't quote me on that one. But I think even Hebrews defines uncertainty. Hebrews even defines faith in the light of uncertainty. Okay, yes. Faith is the certainty of things hoped for, a proof of things not seen. Maybe that's not, maybe not the strongest argument to this character trait. Maybe hold this last pair loosely as something that Nathan is still learning. So White clearly respects uncertainty. The final one, which I think will be a video for itself, is not anxious. And so we have these 7 pairs, but the final one is not anxious. And I think the main point behind this one is that God calls us commands us not to be anxious, and therefore being anxious is a sin. But second is, we are only anxious about that which we don't trust God about. We're anxious about that which we fear losing, and we don't trust God that either 1, He won't let us lose it, or 2, that He'll provide for us if we lose it. And so yeah, a video for another time. Here are some thoughts. I hope they're helpful. Okay, God bless y'all.